It started with whispers, barely audible, like static in the background of a crowded break room. Then came the stares, too long to be casual, too frequent to be random. But what truly changed everything wasn't the bullying, or even the tears that quietly followed after another soul-crushing day at work. No, the real turning point came when someone pressed record. And what that recording captured inside a seemingly ordinary HR office didn't just change a career. It cracked open an entire system of silent cruelty and exposed what really happens when the boss looks the other way, until it's too late. What if I told you that the very people paid to protect employees were watching a storm build right in front of them? And when the lightning finally struck, the only reason the truth didn't disappear was because someone was secretly listening. Stay with me, because this isn't just about one person's painful story. This is about what could happen in any office, to anyone who's just a little different. And yes, by the end of this video, you're going to hear what was actually said in that secret HR recording, the moment everything changed. Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever felt ignored at work? Like your ideas didn't matter? Maybe it was subtle, like being left out of a meeting, or maybe it was louder, like being openly mocked for something you couldn't control. If that ever happened to you, even once, then what I'm about to share will hit home harder than you expect. Because today's story is about a quiet employee named Daniel, someone who didn't speak up, not because he was weak, but because he believed in staying kind, staying professional. Daniel lives with a condition that affects his speech and fine motor skills. It doesn't impact his intelligence, not in the slightest. He's sharp, organized, and the kind of person who shows up early and leaves late. But in the high-pressure world of corporate America, being different, even just slightly, can make you a target. And in Daniel's case, the cruelty wasn't just from one coworker. It came from an entire team, one toxic layer at a time. Now, let's get real for a moment. Bullying in the workplace isn't just playground behavior with a necktie. It's strategic, often hidden, and designed to wear a person down quietly. It doesn't always involve shouting or public embarrassment. Sometimes it's the passive-aggressive notes. Sometimes it's the eye rolls in meetings, or the accidental reassignment of tasks you once owned. And for Daniel, the signs were there until they became impossible to ignore. This story pulls back the curtain on one of the most disturbing HR cases you've never heard of. But we're not just here to expose bad behavior. We're here to see how one unexpected move, a single act of bravery involving a hidden voice recorder, flipped the power dynamic upside down. And if you're thinking this is the kind of plot you'd only find in movies or viral whistleblower stories on Reddit, think again. Because everything you're about to see really happened, and yes, you're going to hear the recording that started it all. Before we dive deeper, I want you to know this story isn't just about disability or workplace politics. It's about you. About what happens when someone who's been silently suffering finally gets heard. And if you stick around, I'll show you how that secret recording turned HR's cold indifference into a legal firestorm. But more importantly, you'll witness how a bullied employee stood up in the most unexpected way, without even raising his voice. This is a workplace thriller, an emotional wake-up call, and a psychological chess match, all wrapped in one. And I promise you, the ending is not what you're expecting. Picture this: an open-plan office, buzz of keyboards, the smell of burnt coffee, and a team of professionals so polished on the outside that no one suspects the venom underneath. Daniel sat quietly at his desk, every day for 5 years. He wasn't flashy.
He didn't gossip.
He just did his job. He even stayed late to help others finish theirs. But slowly, the comments started to creep in, mocking how he pronounced certain words, joking about how long it took him to complete tasks. At first, it was all in good fun. But when his workload mysteriously doubled while others took long lunches, he started to feel the shift. You know that feeling, when something's wrong but no one else seems to see it? Or worse, they see it and pretend they don't? That was Daniel's world for over a year. And then came Melissa, the new HR rep, young, sharp, no-nonsense. People underestimated her at first. But what no one knew was that she had a deeply personal reason for being passionate about workplace discrimination. She'd seen it up close in her own family. So when Daniel finally filed a quiet complaint, she didn't brush it off like others had. She started paying attention. And when her instincts told her something didn't add up, she made a choice that would change everything. She asked Daniel for permission to monitor a few meetings. Covertly. Legally. With discretion. What they captured would make you question how far some people will go to maintain their team culture, even at the expense of a fellow human being. The audio was crackly, recorded through a pocket device in a staff huddle. But what it captured was crystal clear, a supervisor mocking Daniel's voice. Laughter. Another employee suggesting that people like that should work in isolation. More laughter. Then silence, chilling, heavy silence. No one objected. No one defended him. It was a workplace mafia of complicity, where cruelty passed for comedy. And that's just the beginning of what the recordings exposed. I want you to imagine being Daniel. You come to work every day, knowing there's a group chat behind your back, memes with your name, and whispers that die the second you walk into the room. You try to prove yourself again and again, but no matter how well you perform, the goalpost keeps moving. And then, just when you think there's no way out, someone believes you. And not only that, they prove it. That's where this story pivots. Because what HR did next wasn't just about policy, it was about justice. And what Melissa uncovered during the internal audit would send chills down the spine of even the most hardened executive. This story dives into what happened after the tapes were played in a closed-door HR meeting, after the gaslighting stopped, and after the perpetrators realized, too late, that someone had been watching all along. But I'm not going to give away the whole thing just yet. Because the moment where Daniel hears the tapes for the first time, that's a moment you need to experience for yourself. This video isn't just entertainment. It's a mirror. A wake-up call. Because there are thousands of Daniels out there right now, maybe even in your workplace, quietly wondering if they're the problem, when really, it's the system that's broken. If you've ever needed courage to speak up, if you've ever wondered whether silent battles are worth fighting, then keep watching. Because by the end of this video, you'll not only know what was said in that secret HR recording, you'll understand how one small act of recording the truth reshaped an entire workplace. So here's my ask to you. Don't just watch this passively. Engage. React. Share your own thoughts in the comments. Stick with me until the end, because I promise you it's worth it. And who knows? Maybe this story will help someone you care about finally speak up too. Now let's go back to the moment when Melissa pressed play in that HR meeting and everything changed. As Melissa pressed play on the small black device in that quiet HR office, the voices that poured out weren't distorted or distant. They were unmistakably clear, unmistakably cruel, and worse, unmistakably familiar. The room had no windows, but it suddenly felt colder, tighter. Across the table, Daniel sat stiffly, hands folded, eyes low, the weight of 1,000 quiet humiliations tightening around his chest like a vice. This was the moment he both feared and longed for, a moment where his invisible truth was finally given a voice, and not just his. The recording, though short, held enough venom to stop any denial in its tracks. A supervisor, 2 senior teammates, even the guy who always offered Daniel coffee with a smile, they were all there, joking, sneering, impersonating his speech with exaggerated slurs. And it wasn't just an offhand remark. It was a routine, an office sport, the kind of thing that happened often enough to be rehearsed. Daniel didn't cry. He didn't react. He just stared at the table, processing not the cruelty, he already knew that, but the confirmation. The proof that he hadn't imagined it. That the isolation, the missed promotions, the awkward silences weren't just in his head. They were part of a plan. But the question now shifted. How deep did that plan go? And who, exactly, was pulling the strings? Just 3 months earlier, Daniel's world had looked different. He had recently been shortlisted for a lateral promotion, one that would have put him on a small team working directly with the company's clients. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the kind of move that would finally let him step out of the back-end grind and be seen as a contributor, not just a processor. Melissa, new to the department, had even mentioned that he was one of the most detailed and accurate employees in the entire region. But then, almost overnight, his name was dropped from the list. No explanation. No feedback. The opportunity evaporated without a trace. And that's when other things started happening too. Files he'd already submitted were suddenly missing. Reports he'd compiled had errors that he couldn't find, even after triple-checking. Meeting invites stopped coming. Coworkers who once greeted him warmly now only offered brief nods or blank stares. There wasn't a memo, but he felt it. He was being frozen out. And the more he tried to understand why, the more paranoid he felt. Until he stumbled across something that changed his view completely. It happened one Friday evening. Daniel had stayed late, as usual, going over next week's budget sheets. As he reached for the stapler from a nearby desk, he knocked over a manila folder filled with printouts. Pages fluttered across the floor. When he bent down to gather them, he noticed something odd, a printed email thread, not meant for him, addressed between two coworkers he'd worked closely with on the client pitch team. The subject line, "Can we loop in Jared instead of Daniel?" The body of the message was worse. It referred to Daniel as a PR risk and casually mentioned that his verbal quirks might reflect poorly on client-facing interactions. Attached to the chain was an internal note from their manager, suggesting that while Daniel was technically capable, he might not be the right fit for forward-facing roles at this time. No mention of performance. No mention of client compatibility. Just coded language that said what they really meant. He was too different. Daniel didn't take the file. He didn't tell anyone. He just went home and stared at the ceiling until morning. That was the moment something in him began to shift. Not toward anger, but toward resolve. And that's when he started keeping a journal. A record of meetings, comments, subtle changes in behavior. It was his way of proving to himself that he wasn't imagining the shift. He didn't know it yet, but his quiet, meticulous nature, the very thing they mocked, would become the strongest weapon in his corner. But here's where things start to twist, because just as Daniel began gathering his own quiet evidence, something strange happened. One of the employees who distanced themselves suddenly started acting differently. Her name was Rachel, a mid-level associate who'd once shared lunch breaks and quiet laughs with Daniel. She wasn't particularly warm after the shift in office dynamics, but unlike the others, she hadn't been openly cold either. Then, without warning, she began striking up conversations again. Short ones, but regular. She started asking questions about his work, about his family, about how he was coping with everything. On one hand, Daniel wanted to believe she genuinely cared. But something in her timing felt off. Why now? Why after months of silence? And then there was this strange incident with his desk drawer. He'd come in one morning to find it slightly ajar, though he was sure he'd locked it the night before. Nothing was missing, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been rifling through his personal notes. Was it Rachel? Someone else? Or was he starting to see threats where there were none? This is where the story begins to thicken. Because not all threats are visible, and not all enemies look like villains. Some wear friendly smiles. Some drop helpful suggestions in meetings. Some even defend you publicly while quietly undermining you behind closed doors. Red herrings, false allies, corporate politics, it's all part of the same game. And Daniel was starting to realize that the bullying wasn't random or isolated. It was coordinated. It had structure. And someone, somewhere, had decided he was expendable. But why? Was it just discomfort around disability, as ugly and primitive as that sounds? Or was there something else? A motive deeper than fear of client image? Daniel began to suspect that his removal from the promotion list wasn't just about perception, it was about control. Someone stood to gain by keeping him off that team. And when Melissa quietly asked if he'd be willing to participate in a confidential review of departmental culture, he agreed, but only if they could start collecting real evidence. That's when the recordings began. One in a hallway outside the break room. Another during an after-hours brainstorming session. What they picked up wasn't always direct. Sometimes it was passive, the kind of jokes that don't leave bruises but leave scars. Sometimes it was silence, coworkers looking away while others mocked. And every now and then there was something more, something calculating. In one particular clip, Daniel's manager, Mr. Levine, can be heard saying, "We just need someone who doesn't come with extra complications. You know what I mean?" The other voice, laughing, responds, "It's not personal. It's just business." That clip was never supposed to be heard outside the room. But now, with Melissa's help, it was part of a growing case file. Still, despite the damning audio, there was a problem. Someone was leaking information. Melissa noticed it first when a few HR files she'd bookmarked were mysteriously unlinked. Then Daniel's own computer access was temporarily revoked due to a security update. A classic maneuver, one used to keep targets off balance without creating a trail. And in the middle of it all, Rachel continued to show up, asking questions she shouldn't know to ask, mentioning conversations Daniel hadn't told her about. But when Melissa looked into her, nothing stuck. No formal complaints. Spotless record. Was she playing both sides? Or was she being used, just like Daniel? Just when things were starting to fall into place, when the pieces of the puzzle seemed to finally align and give Daniel some footing, it all took a sudden, jarring turn. The evidence, the audio recordings Melissa had so carefully logged and secured on her encrypted drive, were gone. Not corrupted, not mislabeled, just completely wiped from the system. Melissa had saved them under multiple layers of password-protected folders, with backups stored on an external drive she kept in her locked filing cabinet. But that morning, when she opened the drawer to grab the drive before a scheduled meeting with the legal department, it wasn't there. She didn't panic at first, thinking maybe she'd left it in her home office. But when she checked her cloud login, the backups were gone too. Every last file. The folder names remained, as if mocking her, but the contents were empty. Hours of surveillance, interviews, and the all-important hallway conversation with Mr. Levine were now missing. Melissa's hands shook as she stared at the blank directory. She didn't need anyone to tell her what had happened. Someone inside had found a way to scrub the system clean. Someone with admin clearance. And the more you look, the more you realize that in corporate America, the most dangerous villains are the ones who never get their hands dirty. But here's the real twist. Melissa wasn't the only one recording. And in the next part of this story, a second recording surfaces, one that turns the entire narrative on its head and introduces a shocking new voice into the mix. Who was it? And why did they risk everything to get it? Just when things were starting to fall into place, when the pieces of the puzzle seemed to finally align and give Daniel some footing, it all took a sudden, jarring turn. The evidence, the audio recordings Melissa had so carefully logged and secured on her encrypted drive, were gone. Not corrupted, not mislabeled, just completely wiped from the system. Melissa had saved them under multiple layers of password-protected folders, with backups stored on an external drive she kept in her locked filing cabinet. But that morning, when she opened the drawer to grab the drive before a scheduled meeting with the legal department, it wasn't there. She didn't panic at first, thinking maybe she'd left it in her home office. But when she checked her cloud login, the backups were gone too. Every last file. The folder names remained, as if mocking her, but the contents were empty. Hours of surveillance, interviews, and the all-important hallway conversation with Mr. Levine were now missing. Melissa's hands shook as she stared at the blank directory. She didn't need anyone to tell her what had happened. Someone inside had found a way to scrub the system clean. Someone with admin clearance. That same afternoon, Daniel received a cryptic message slipped under his keyboard. No name, just a folded post-it note with 7 typed words. Stop looking, or you'll lose everything. No signature. No identifying marks. The paper was plain. The message chilling. He turned the note over, heart pounding, trying to figure out if it was a cruel prank or a serious threat. And it wasn't just the message, it was the timing. It had to have been placed there during the lunch hour, when he stepped out to grab his usual turkey sandwich. The note hadn't been there before. He was certain of it. The office was quiet when he returned, but everyone acted normal. Too normal. The casual conversations, the soft laughs, it all felt like a script being performed around him. Daniel sat back in his chair, trying not to look visibly rattled. But the voice in his head kept repeating one question over and over. How did they know? Melissa called him into her office an hour later, her tone calm, but her eyes full of panic. She didn't even sit down. She just handed him a sealed envelope. Inside was a printout, one of the earlier transcripts she'd typed out from the now-missing recordings. Not all of them, just a single excerpt. It was the one that had captured Mr. Levine's extra complications comment, followed by a suggestion from a second speaker, whose voice they still hadn't identified, that Daniel B. managed out before Q3 evaluations. That transcript had been printed days earlier, just for her own notes. It was the only surviving piece of evidence. And now it might be the only proof left. But then something even stranger happened. That night, Melissa's LinkedIn profile vanished. Her email bounced back. By morning, her employee credentials had been revoked. Officially, the company said she had resigned effective immediately, citing personal reasons. But Daniel knew Melissa. She wasn't the type to back down, not without a fight. Not without calling him. And she hadn't. Not a text, not an email, not even a missed call. Just silence. It felt like she had disappeared off the face of the earth. That was when Daniel realized he might be completely alone again. The one ally he trusted most was suddenly gone, and no one at the office seemed the least bit surprised. In fact, no one even mentioned her name. Not once. Like she never existed. Still reeling from the loss of both Melissa and the recordings, Daniel was approached by someone unexpected, Rachel. She showed up at his cubicle, looking visibly nervous, and asked if they could talk somewhere private. He hesitated but agreed, mostly out of desperation. They ended up in the parking garage, behind a concrete column where the cameras didn't reach. She pulled out her phone, checked it, turned it off, and then stuffed it into her bag. Only then did she speak. "You're being watched," she whispered. "They know everything you've done. Everything she recorded. And it goes higher than Levine." Daniel pressed her for more, but she shook her head. "I can't say it here. But there was another case. Before you. A different department, different person." She filed complaints. She thought she was safe too. Daniel leaned in, trying to understand, but Rachel looked over her shoulder, spooked. "Look," she said, "I want to help you. But if they think I'm involved, I'll be next." She reached into her coat and handed him a thumb drive. "Use it once. Don't plug it in here. And don't call me." Then she walked away, without looking back. That night, Daniel sat alone in his apartment, staring at the tiny drive in his hand. The anxiety of the past few weeks had mutated into something else, a deep, gnawing dread. He powered on his personal laptop, disconnected it from the internet, and inserted the drive. Inside was a single folder titled FYI. Inside the folder, dozens of emails, some screenshots, even internal memos, none addressed to him, but all mentioning his name. Some were marked, internal discussion only. One thread suggested a restructuring plan that would quietly phase out employees unsuitable for public-facing responsibilities. Another email included an attached behavioral observation report with his initials, notes that twisted his stutter into possible social disengagement, his quiet nature into lack of team fit. But most disturbing of all was a file labeled History. When Daniel opened it, he found a summary report of a 2018 employee grievance case involving someone named Carla J., a former analyst in another division. According to the file, she had accused her team of coordinated exclusion and verbal abuse after returning from a medical leave involving surgery. Her claims were dismissed for insufficient evidence. 6 weeks later, she'd quit. Without notice. No forwarding contact. Nothing. The report closed with a single line. No further investigation necessary. The language was cold. Clinical. But what chilled Daniel most was how similar it all felt, like he was reading his own story, just written under someone else's name. As he stared at the file, something clicked. Melissa hadn't just stumbled into this culture. She'd been investigating it. She had mentioned earlier that this wasn't the first time. But she never said how she knew. Now he understood. She had been tracking it long before she met Daniel. And now she was missing. Was Rachel telling the truth? Or was she part of the trap? Was this mysterious Carla still out there? And if so, had she simply vanished? Or was she silenced? Most importantly, who else at the company was involved? And how far would they go to keep their secrets buried? Daniel closed the file, sat back, and stared into the dark of his apartment. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt alive, like someone was listening, watching. He now had just enough information to know how dangerous things really were, but not nearly enough to know who was behind it. And just as he shut his laptop, his phone buzzed. No caller ID. One line of text. She's not gone. But if you keep pushing, she will be. He froze. The screen went black. Something was coming, but from where and from whom was still a mystery. The next morning, before Daniel could even process the threat from the anonymous message on his phone, he received a frantic call from someone he hadn't spoken to in months. Jordan, a former coworker who had transferred to the company's Atlanta branch the previous year after what was officially described as a voluntary relocation. But Daniel remembered the truth. Jordan had been quietly moved after raising concerns about a pattern of unspoken bias in their division, a conversation that had never gone anywhere, except it ended with Jordan being asked to consider other growth opportunities. Now, nearly a year later, Jordan's voice on the phone was tight with anxiety. "Did you get a message?" he asked, barely waiting for a hello. "Because I just found something in my inbox." It was an old email, one I never wrote. Daniel sat up, instantly alert. Jordan continued, describing how he had opened his work email that morning to find a draft saved under his name, dated 2 days prior, accusing Daniel of workplace misconduct and aggressive behavior during a departmental meeting that never even happened. It looked official, with timestamps and internal HR forwarding chains, but Jordan swore he never touched his account. "They're manufacturing stuff," he said. "They're setting up a fall guy. Maybe you. Maybe me. I don't know anymore." Daniel's mind spun as he tried to make sense of it. Someone was planting evidence now, bending reality to fit a narrative no one could fully see yet. And what if the missing audio recordings hadn't been deleted, but were being twisted, edited, turned into a version of events that painted Daniel as the problem? He thought back to the whispered conversations behind glass conference room doors, the slight but telling silences when he entered a room, the polite but evasive smiles from senior staff. Maybe it had never been about catching the harassment at all. Maybe it had always been about erasing it and turning the target into the threat. But there was more. Jordan told him he had dug up something odd from the internal company system before his access was mysteriously restricted, an old employee profile for someone named Carla J., the same name from the hidden file on the thumb drive. Her profile had a termination date listed as April 24, 2018. But Jordan had screenshots showing that same employee was recorded as accessing an HR terminal 2 months after that date. The records were buried in a facility log, one that shouldn't have been accessible from Atlanta. "Someone changed the dates," Jordan whispered. "Or she was still inside the building after they claimed she was gone." But that wasn't the worst part. Jordan had tried to contact a friend in the IT department to ask about Carla's old badge history, and by the next day, his VPN access had been revoked. His internal messages bounced. He was told by his supervisor that his contract was being reviewed for compliance concerns. It was like watching a noose slowly tighten around two people who didn't even know where the trap had started. Daniel realized they weren't just being watched, they were being manipulated, discredited, and one misstep away from losing everything. What if Melissa hadn't vanished on her own? What if she had discovered this deeper layer and tried to warn him, only to be silenced before she could finish the trail? At that point, Daniel decided he needed help from someone on the outside, someone with no ties to the company. He reached out to Leah, a friend from college who had since become an investigative journalist in Chicago. They hadn't spoken in years, but he knew if anyone could see through the fog, it would be her. He sent her an encrypted file with the contents of Rachel's thumb drive, along with everything Jordan had sent him. He didn't include his name at first, just a subject line that read, "If I disappear, start here." 2 days passed without a response. Then, at exactly 3:07 p.m., Leah texted him a single line, "This goes way deeper than corporate politics. Call me now." When Daniel called her back, her voice was calm but clearly shaken. "I ran some of the documents through a metadata scrubber," she explained. "And you're not going to believe what I found." Many of the files had been modified, some multiple times, using different internal authorizations. One in particular, a memo allegedly written by HR Director Abigail Moreno, had 3 separate versions hidden in the source code, including a reference to an off-record employee assessment program. Leah also found connections between that memo and a private consulting firm, one that specialized in internal investigations and behavior audits. But here was the twist. That consulting firm had contracts with not just Daniel's company, but several others across the country. And in more than one case, those companies had experienced sudden, unexplained resignations and anonymous reports of targeted internal retaliation, always followed by a clean HR summary and no public complaint. It's like a corporate cleaning service, Leah said, but not the kind that vacuums your carpets. Daniel's chest tightened. The possibility that his company wasn't just hiding harassment, but actively partnering with outsiders to suppress it, changed everything. It wasn't just about bullies in the workplace. It was about a coordinated system designed to eliminate problems quietly, methodically, and without legal fallout. The missing files, the altered logs, the anonymous threats, it all pointed to something much larger and far more dangerous. And then, as if to confirm just how real the threat had become, Daniel received an email on his personal account, one he hadn't used in months. It was from a dummy address. No subject line, just a single attachment, a screenshot of his apartment hallway from the security camera he didn't even realize was there. The timestamp? 3 hours ago. The angle showed the door to his unit. Someone had been watching, and they wanted him to know it. Daniel stared at the image, his fingers frozen over the keyboard. This wasn't paranoia anymore. It wasn't a theory. Someone had eyes on him. Someone who had access, timing, and no hesitation about crossing lines. The apartment suddenly felt smaller. The air heavier. His phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Another message. She tried to trust the wrong person. Don't make her mistake. Was it Rachel? Was it Leah? Or someone he didn't even know was involved yet? Whatever answers Daniel thought he had just uncovered, a new wave of questions had already arrived. Faster, darker, and more dangerous than before. And the worst part? He still didn't know who the real enemy was. Or if they were already standing right beside him. Daniel barely slept that night. Every creak of the old apartment walls made him jump. The hallway camera image wouldn't leave his mind. It felt burned into the back of his eyes, and every time he closed them, he saw that frame. The dim light, the shadow of a boot just barely out of view, the unmistakable positioning that told him someone had been standing directly in front of his door without knocking. It wasn't just intimidation anymore, it was surveillance. Calculated, intentional, close. By morning, his chest ached from the tension, the constant clenching of muscles that hadn't relaxed in days. He checked the door lock 3 times before stepping out, and as he did, he noticed something that made his stomach twist. A piece of duct tape, barely noticeable, was attached to the bottom corner of his doorframe. Fresh. Unweathered. The kind of thing someone might use to track whether the door had been opened. He hadn't seen it last night, which meant someone had placed it there after he got home. He felt sick. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was a game. And someone was letting him know they were already inside it. He made his way to a nearby cafe, not his usual one, but one 3 blocks farther out, a place with crowds, security cameras, and a front window where he could keep an eye on everyone walking by. He sat with his back against the wall, ordered a coffee, and waited for Leah to call. The anxiety had moved past adrenaline. It had settled into a cold, shaking pit in his gut, a gnawing feeling that something worse was coming. When his phone finally rang, it wasn't Leah. It was Jordan's number. But the voice on the other end wasn't Jordan's. It was a woman, calm but rushed, like she was speaking under her breath. "You need to leave wherever you are," she said. "And don't call this number again." The line went dead. Daniel tried calling back, but the number was suddenly disconnected. Gone. As if it had never existed. Now his hands were trembling. Jordan was the only link he had to the other side of the story, the one person who knew what was going on inside that company from a different angle. And now his number was being used by a stranger who sounded terrified. Daniel scrolled through his text history and saw their entire thread vanished. Every screenshot, every file, every message erased. The only thing that remained was one photo Jordan had sent earlier, a blurry still from the company's internal surveillance footage showing someone, possibly Rachel, walking through the parking structure at 3 a.m., 3 weeks after she had supposedly left on medical leave. She was wearing the same coat from her last known day at the office. That image was all he had left. But the question now wasn't just what had happened to her, it was whether Jordan had met the same fate. Suddenly, everything felt different. The walls weren't just closing in, they were shifting. Daniel began to wonder if the things he believed were true ever really were. Who had access to his device? Who had wiped his messages? How could someone have edited footage and erased files without a trace? It couldn't just be rogue employees or a shady consulting firm anymore. This felt bigger, more dangerous. And it wasn't just his career at stake, it was his safety. On impulse, he got up and left the cafe, walking briskly without a destination. He made random turns, doubled back twice, and stopped at a crosswalk where a delivery van idled with its engine running. In the driver's seat, a man in dark sunglasses stared straight ahead, not moving. Nothing about him seemed out of place, except for one thing. Daniel had seen that van before. Not parked, not moving, but idling outside his apartment 2 mornings earlier. It had no logo, no license number on the bumper, just white, blank panels. As the walk light turned green and Daniel stepped into the street, the van didn't move. The driver didn't look at him. He just kept staring forward, unmoving, unreadable. Daniel's heart pounded. When he reached the other side, he ducked into a corner market and watched from behind the display shelves. The van remained for exactly 30 seconds, then slowly pulled away, without picking up or dropping off anything. It wasn't delivering. It was watching. Daniel rushed to a nearby public library, one of the few places left with anonymous internet access. He logged into a temporary guest account and emailed Leah again, this time using a throwaway address. No names. No backstory. Just one sentence. They're tracking me in real time. Jordan might be gone. Tell me what you know about Carla J. He hit send and quickly deleted the draft. He didn't wait for a reply, he couldn't afford to. If his phone was compromised, then anything with his name on it might be feeding directly to whoever was orchestrating this mess. And as he stood up to leave, a voice came from behind him, low and almost familiar. "You're not supposed to be here." Daniel turned around, but the man was already walking away, khakis, button-up shirt, a visitor badge clipped to his collar. He looked like a regular patron, someone browsing the library stacks. But there was something unmistakably rehearsed about the way he disappeared around the corner. Too fast, too smooth. And as Daniel exited through the rear door, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just crossed another invisible boundary, one where he wasn't just an employee or a whistleblower anymore, but a threat. Something or someone wanted him quiet. And now, even his allies were vanishing one by one. The worst part? He still hadn't heard from Leah. That silence grew heavier with every hour. Daniel checked his inbox obsessively, hoping for even a breadcrumb. But nothing came. And then, late that evening, as he sat on a park bench under flickering street lamps, watching shadows move between parked cars, he noticed something tucked under his windshield wiper. Not a parking ticket. Not an ad. A single piece of printer paper, folded twice. No markings. Just a handwritten note in block letters. "You were never meant to see what Rachel found. Walk away. Final warning." Daniel stood frozen, staring at it in disbelief. His thoughts were racing now, not just with fear, but with the sickening realization that there might be no one left he could trust. What had Rachel found? Who was Carla J. really? Why did Jordan disappear right after digging into her profile? And how many people had been quietly removed before him? He turned slowly, scanning the street. Nothing moved. The silence was loud. The air was thick. And for the first time, he realized something chilling. He might not just be running out of answers. He might be running out of time. Daniel sat motionless in his apartment, the warning note still clutched in his hand, its sharp folds digging into his palm like it wanted to cut through skin, force his attention. He stared at the wall across from him, not seeing the framed diploma or the calendar still flipped to the previous month, just playing every moment back in his head, trying to make it make sense. He was looking for something he missed. A detail. A phrase. A slip. Anything. The paranoia that had been stalking him had fully settled in now, and as the city buzzed outside his window, all he could think about was Rachel's last words in that hidden recording, the one that started it all. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. At the time, it sounded like fear. Now, it sounded like prophecy. And maybe something else. Unable to sit still, Daniel reopened his encrypted drive and listened to the file again. He let it play in full this time. Every breath, every ambient sound, every whispered word. But something struck him differently now. There was a pause halfway through, just after she said her manager, Carla J., had direct access to the correction filters. At first, that line felt like tech jargon, something related to the internal HR database. But then she said, "They don't fix errors, they rewrite facts." It chilled him when he heard it the first time, but now it clawed at him. He replayed it again. And again. Then something else hit him. At the 12-minute mark, she said, "They're not just changing reports, Daniel. They're changing identities." And that's when he froze. Because she didn't say it to the recorder. She said it directly to him. Daniel had never noticed that before. It was the way she said his name, clear, deliberate, as if they were speaking in real time. But this recording was dated 2 weeks before he ever spoke to her. That shouldn't have been possible. And suddenly, it all came rushing back. The night they first met in the elevator, when she looked at him strangely, like she recognized him. He assumed it was just a passing glance, maybe awkwardness. But now he wasn't so sure. What if she had known him? What if this wasn't the first time they'd spoken, but the first time he remembered? A cold shiver passed over his skin. Daniel dug through his old email archives, desperately searching for a specific thread, his original HR onboarding file, something he had barely glanced at a year ago. But when he opened it, nothing looked familiar. His name was there, yes. So was the date of hire. But the ID badge photo? It wasn't the one he remembered. It was a slightly different version, and the reflection in his glasses showed someone standing beside him, half cut off in the frame. A woman with auburn hair. Rachel? The file name was a random string of characters. But buried in the metadata, one line stood out in bold font. Ver 3.4 upload by C. Jackson_override. Daniel's heart began to pound. What version of him was this? What had been overwritten? And by whom? He barely had time to process it when his burner email pinged with a reply from Leah. It was just one sentence. "Come alone. Bring nothing digital." Attached was a map with a single red circle drawn around an abandoned office park outside the city. Against every instinct screaming in his head, he went. The building was eerily quiet, the kind of corporate shell that had been left behind after remote work took over, forgotten but not entirely abandoned. In the far back corner of the second floor, Leah sat in a room lit only by a desk lamp. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back hastily, eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. Without greeting, without hesitation, she dropped the bomb. "Daniel, you're not supposed to exist." He blinked, stunned. "What the hell are you talking about?" She handed him a stack of printed pages. Not emails, not texts, printouts. Dozens of internal memos, all with redacted names, except one. Subject override authorized. Daniel Reeves. Codename reactivation approved. Memory barrier compromised. Contained before cascade. He couldn't breathe. It was like his entire body forgot how to function. Leah leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You weren't hired. You were inserted. They needed someone to monitor Rachel when she started asking questions. Someone who wouldn't even know they were doing it. You're a plant, Daniel. They wiped your identity and fed you a new one. But Rachel figured it out. She broke the memory lock and left breadcrumbs for you, because you were the only one still clean." "No," Daniel shook his head. "That's not possible. I've lived here for years. I have friends, family, my old college roommate." Leah cut him off. "Think, Daniel. When's the last time you spoke to him? Your parents? Your childhood? What's the last real memory you have before this job?" His mouth opened, but nothing came out. It was like trying to reach into a cloud fog, Indistinct shapes, no substance. Nothing concrete before his first day at the company. A manufactured past. A planted life. The truth hit him harder than any threat, any shadow at his door. It wasn't just about Rachel, or Carla, or a corporate cover-up. It was about who he was. And maybe who he wasn't. And then Leah said something he'd never forget. They're not trying to cover up a crime. They're trying to control the story before it collapses. Rachel didn't disappear because she found something dangerous. She vanished because she found something true. Something so buried, even she didn't survive it. Before Daniel could respond, the lights flickered, and Leah's face went pale. "They're here," she whispered. And just like that, every truth Daniel thought he uncovered was shattered again. The real story hadn't even started. The hallway outside that dark office echoed with approaching footsteps, slow, deliberate, the kind that didn't belong to someone lost or hesitant. Leah instinctively reached for the light switch and killed it, plunging the room into shadows. They crouched behind a filing cabinet, Daniel's heart pounding so loudly he was sure whoever was outside could hear it. His mind was racing, trying to piece together everything Leah had just told him while also bracing for whatever, or whoever, was coming. But the footsteps passed without incident, fading down the corridor until there was only silence again. Still, it changed everything. They weren't safe anymore, not even for a second. Back in the safety of his car later that night, Daniel sat in the driver's seat gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. The idea that he wasn't who he thought he was, that his life had been planted, curated, assigned, was more than he could handle. He tried calling his mom again. Straight to voicemail. Again. He opened his social media apps, scrolled through his past posts, birthday photos, vacations, college memories, but the faces in those pictures felt strangely vacant now, like stock images filtered through a mask of familiarity. He clicked on one tagged with his name and realized, for the first time, he didn't remember being there. He knew what he had to do, but it tore him in half to even consider it. There was one person he trusted above everyone, his girlfriend, Erin. She was the only constant in his life who felt real, grounded. She had been with him before the job, or so he believed. But now he couldn't be sure. And if what Leah said was true, and if people close to him had been part of the construction of his life, then Erin might not just be an innocent bystander. She might be the key. When he got home, Erin was there, curled up on the couch in sweats, eating popcorn, a reality show flickering in the background. Her smile when she saw him made his stomach twist. She was either the one thing in this world that made sense, or the most perfect lie they'd built for him. And he had to know. He sat next to her, trying to act normal. "Hey, can I ask you something weird?" he began, voice tight. She laughed. "That's never a good start. What's up?" He forced a smile. "Do you remember the first time we met?" She blinked. "Of course. You spilled coffee on my shoes outside of Capitol Roasters. You tried to apologize with a gift card that had, like, $2 on it." He nodded slowly.
Right.
"And when was that?" She didn't hesitate. 3 years ago, January. You were wearing that ridiculous plaid coat you refused to throw away. It all sounded right. Too clean. No hesitation, no stumbles. And suddenly Daniel felt like he was watching her recite lines from a script. "What's going on?" she asked, sitting up. "You're acting weird." He stared at her, every cell in his body fighting against the thought. "Did someone ask you to be with me? Did anyone ever offer you something? I need you to tell me the truth, Erin. Please." Her eyes narrowed. "What are you even saying right now?" He repeated the question, slower this time. Her face shifted, not into confusion or offense, but something more guarded. Her silence was an answer he didn't want. When she finally spoke, her voice dropped an octave. "You're remembering things you're not supposed to, aren't you?" It was like being punched in the chest. Daniel stood up, his breathing ragged. "So it's true. All of it." Erin stood too, hands raised like she was trying to calm a wild animal. "Daniel, I never lied about how I felt. They didn't make that part up. But yes, I was placed. I didn't have a choice." "You did have a choice," he said, voice cracking. "You still do." She stepped closer. They're watching me too, Daniel. If I go against them, I disappear. Just like Rachel. He backed away. I don't know who you are. She hesitated, then said, I'm someone who wants to keep you alive. He didn't sleep that night. He just drove through the city through back roads until dawn started bleeding into the horizon. He thought about disappearing, running, maybe going to the press. But who would believe him? His entire life was curated. Every file could be rewritten. Every proof could be erased. If he vanished, it would look like he never existed. Just another file flagged for deletion. And then came the email. Not from Leah. Not from Aaron. From an anonymous address with no subject line and one single attachment. A photo. Rachel. Alive. Sitting in what looked like a storage container, holding up a newspaper dated yesterday. Her face bruised, her eyes pleading. Below the photo was one sentence. Trade your silence for her freedom. Daniel stared at the screen, caught between two impossible roads. If he walked away, she lived. But the truth, his truth, died forever. If he fought, if he exposed everything, there was no guarantee he could save her. Or himself. And just like that, the rules of the game changed again. What began as a story of workplace bullying and corporate corruption had mutated into something far deeper, far more dangerous. Daniel wasn't just trying to uncover a cover-up anymore. He was trying to figure out who he really was and whether that truth was worth dying for. Daniel's breath fogged up the inside of the windshield as he sat in his car outside the crumbling edge of an industrial complex that hadn't seen life in years. It was the location tied to the GPS metadata embedded in Rachel's photo. Every part of him screamed that this was a trap, but doing nothing wasn't an option anymore. He knew now the situation wasn't just about office harassment or even corporate corruption. It was something far more sprawling, something embedded in the very institutions people trusted without question. The HR department wasn't just incompetent or cruel. They were part of a system that had been erasing, silencing, and rewriting lives for years. Leah wasn't the only one with missing pieces, and Rachel wasn't the only one being held hostage. As he crossed the threshold into the warehouse, the sheer emptiness of the space made his skin crawl. The flickering light overhead revealed crates stacked high, old equipment covered in tarps, and a metallic tang in the air that hinted at abandonment, or maybe blood. He moved slowly, heart pounding in his ears, until he reached the far end where a narrow staircase led down. The deeper he went, the more he felt the world tighten around him, like descending into the throat of something alive. And that's when he saw her. Rachel was shackled to a chair, bruised, but conscious. Their eyes locked, and the air in Daniel's lungs froze. "Daniel," she whispered, "behind you." Before he could turn, something hard struck the side of his skull, and the world spiraled into blackness. He woke up in a concrete room, wrists zip-tied, blood sticky at his temple. Across from him stood someone he never expected, his old manager, Keating. The man who had once handed Daniel a promotion with a fake smile and a polished HR memo. Now he stood in tactical gear, holding a tablet and grinning like a man who'd finally dropped the act. "You had to keep digging, huh?" Keating said, his voice stripped of any corporate politeness. "You were supposed to be a closed file, Daniel. A success story." Daniel spat blood onto the floor, eyes blazing. "What are you talking about?" Keating tapped the tablet. "You think we just handle payroll and benefits? We're not HR. We're behavioral engineers. We identify anomalies. People who don't conform, who question too much, who remember things they shouldn't. And then we correct them. Or erase them." It hit Daniel all at once. The gaslighting, the disappearing files, the scripted coworkers. He hadn't just been bullied for his disability. His difference had flagged him in a system that monitored behavior, flagged potential risks, and systematically broke them down. "You targeted me from the start. You were never meant to go this far," Keating said with a shrug. "But then you started poking around with Leah, with Rachel. And now, well, now you know too much." At that moment, the door slammed open, and Aaron burst in. For a heartbeat, Daniel's chest lifted with hope, until he saw the badge hanging from her neck. Not an ID for his company, but for a government contractor with deep ties to private intelligence networks. She wasn't a hired accomplice. She was part of the program. He tried to speak, but the betrayal was too sharp to swallow. She didn't look away. Instead, she stepped closer and said, "They were going to wipe your memory again. I convinced them to give you this instead. One choice. You walk away from this. You forget Rachel. You forget Leah. You go back to the life we gave you. Or what?" Daniel asked, bitter. "Or we finish what we started. And there won't be a second chance." The words echoed through the cold concrete chamber, and the weight of it crushed something inside him. They weren't hiding anymore. This was the reveal. The moment where every layer of illusion was peeled away, and what remained was a system so big, so well-oiled, that it could rewrite identities like changing files on a computer. Daniel wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. But he was the only one in this moment who could fight back. His pulse pounded with fear, but underneath it surged something else, rage. The kind that builds from years of silent abuse, microaggressions dismissed by higher-ups, struggles ignored by co-workers who smiled in meetings but never once asked if he was okay. It all crystallized into a single truth. The fight was bigger than him now, and it was just beginning. But before he could respond, the lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the room, followed by the metallic click of a door unlocking from the inside. And just as quickly, a red glow bathed the walls from an emergency exit light, revealing a shadowy figure entering from behind Aaron. A voice Daniel hadn't heard in weeks cut through the tension. "I told you not to trust anyone," Leah said. "Especially her." Everything Daniel thought he knew was about to be rewritten again. The red emergency lights strobed slowly as the door slammed shut behind Leah, plunging the room into a pulsing glow that painted everyone's faces in harsh shadows. Daniel stared at her like he was seeing a ghost, but she didn't offer comfort or explanation, just a short nod and a steely look that said this wasn't the time for reunions. Aaron turned, surprised but not shaken, as if she'd expected Leah's return all along. Keating, meanwhile, didn't move an inch. He kept his cold, analytical stare on Daniel, even as the room grew thick with tension, charged like the air before a storm. The confrontation everyone had tried to avoid was now unavoidable. This was the moment, the truth or oblivion. "I told you he wouldn't take the deal," Leah said, stepping forward, her eyes locked on Aaron's. "He was never going to walk away." Aaron sighed, lowering the badge around her neck. "He should have. Now they'll erase both of you." Keating finally spoke, his voice calm and almost amused. "You think you can just walk in here, disrupt protocol, and change the system? You don't even know what we've buried, what we've built." There are layers to this Daniel couldn't begin to understand. But Daniel had been listening to more than just words. His mind was replaying every coded conversation, every glance, every piece of strange behavior from people he thought he knew. All the missing pieces started falling into place like dominoes. Leah hadn't just survived. She'd gone underground. The email Rachel had sent wasn't just a warning, it was bait. A breadcrumb left deliberately. The entire trap had been reversed, and the warehouse wasn't a prison anymore. It was the stage for exposure. Leah reached into her coat and pulled out a compact device, one Daniel recognized instantly as a portable hard drive. It was old school, analog enough to avoid detection or remote interference. "You kept everything," she said to Keating. "Your arrogance made it easy. Every digital correction, every psychological file, every illegal memory modification, archived neatly and hidden under layers of false compliance reports. But you missed one." Keating's face finally cracked. Just a twitch at the corner of his jaw. "That's not possible." "Oh, but it is," Leah snapped. "Daniel's file was duplicated by mistake and left on a test server. You thought it was wiped after the merge, but it wasn't. Rachel found it. And before she was taken, she uploaded it to me." For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Aaron took a step back, realization dawning too late. Keating's eyes darted toward a console across the room, but Daniel was already on his feet, his restraints cut loose by Leah moments earlier. He sprinted across the floor, slamming his fist into the control panel as alarms blared overhead. Sparks flew, and a security screen lit up, showing camera feeds, offices, labs, dozens of people just like him being observed in real time. Keating lunged, but Daniel grabbed him, slamming him into the console with every ounce of adrenaline his body had left. The two men fought violently, fists landing heavy, breaths coming in gasps. Years of betrayal, manipulation, and injustice came pouring out in every punch. But it wasn't just a physical battle, it was psychological. Keating knew how to twist words to make Daniel doubt his reality. Even now, between strikes, he hissed things meant to unravel him. You were happier before. We fixed you. You begged us to make the pain go away. But Daniel had already reclaimed his mind. The doubt no longer had roots to grow in. As the fight raged on, Leah worked quickly at the console, uploading the files to an off-site server that couldn't be traced or shut down. Aaron tried to stop her, but she hesitated. Something in her eyes cracked, the weight of guilt finally catching up. She stepped back, torn between loyalty and humanity, and for once, chose not to interfere. Daniel landed the final blow, sending Keating crumpling to the ground. Blood ran from his mouth as he glared up at them, still defiant. They'll never let you get away with this. You're just two broken people. Leah knelt beside him, voice low but resolute. Maybe, but broken people still bleed. And broken people fight. Then everything happened at once. The upload completed. A burst of sirens erupted from the floors above. Backup had been alerted. Time was up. They ran, Daniel, Leah, and even Aaron, who had chosen her side far too late, but still wanted out. As they emerged into the sunlight outside the warehouse, the city's skyline glimmered in the distance, unaware of the storm headed its way. Within minutes, the files would hit the public domain. Names, procedures, confidential documents, all proof that what Daniel had endured wasn't paranoia. It was policy. But just as they reached Leah's parked car, Daniel's phone buzzed. It was from Rachel. One line. You were never supposed to see the real file. His stomach dropped. He turned to Leah slowly. She's alive. Leah's face went pale. What do you mean? Daniel showed her the message, but the sender ID wasn't traceable. It wasn't routed through any of Rachel's old accounts. In fact, the metadata was scrambled in a way even Leah hadn't seen before. Before they could process it, a voice echoed from behind them. That file wasn't the whole truth, it said. They turned to see a woman step out from a black SUV, dressed in civilian clothes, her expression unreadable. She held up a flash drive. You exposed what we wanted you to. But the real program, it's still running. The world tilted again. And just like that, the conspiracy wasn't over. It had only just begun. In the days that followed, the world began to shift. The files Leah and Daniel had exposed tore through the very fabric of the system they had fought so hard to dismantle. News outlets, government agencies, and tech companies scrambled to contain the fallout, but the truth had already taken root. The names, the experiments, the people whose lives had been manipulated, violated, and erased, it was all laid bare. What had once been a carefully orchestrated system of control became a worldwide firestorm. Public trust in the institutions they had relied on for years shattered like glass under the weight of reality. For Daniel, it was both a victory and a curse. The faces of his colleagues, the people who had once been his mentors, were now plastered across every news story, their lives unraveling as quickly as the truth spread. He'd exposed a global conspiracy, but at what cost? Some would say it was worth it. Many lives saved, many truths revealed, but as he watched his own life disintegrate in the wake of the scandal, the question lingered. Had it all been worth it? Leah stayed by his side, just as she had when they first uncovered the mystery. But there was something different in the air now. It wasn't just the fame or the recognition. It was the quiet toll it had taken on both of them. They'd fought back against a system that had dehumanized them, but it had left its mark. Still, in the aftermath, there was a sliver of peace. They weren't broken anymore, not entirely. They had survived, and they had made the world see the truth. But as they looked to the future, A future that had once seemed like a dream. The weight of everything they had lost hung heavily over them. Daniel visited his old home one last time, a place now void of memories, the walls stripped bare of everything but echoes of the man he had once been. He stood there, staring at the empty spaces where his life used to exist. He thought about the person he was before, the person who had trusted everything and everyone around him. That person had died long ago, before the experiments, before the lies, before the betrayals. But standing in that silence, Daniel realized something profound. He wasn't the same person anymore. Maybe he never would be, but that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. He had survived, and somehow, in the chaos of it all, he had found his own strength. In the end, that was the real victory. Leah, too, had found a measure of peace, though hers was quieter. She had spent years hiding in the shadows, making deals with people who never cared for her, only for the information she could provide. But now, as the world began to change around her, she could finally see a path ahead that wasn't controlled by anyone. She wasn't just a survivor of the system anymore. She was free. It was the hardest thing to accept, but it was also the most empowering. She had fought to expose the truth, and in doing so, she had exposed herself. And now, she could decide who she wanted to be next. But even as they both found some form of resolution, the shadows of the past still clung to them. That message from Rachel, "You were never supposed to see the real file," was like a ghost that haunted Daniel's mind, its meaning lingering in the back of his thoughts. He'd thought he understood the truth, but that message suggested there was still more beneath the surface. Maybe the conspiracy wasn't as shattered as he thought. Maybe it had only just begun to reveal its true scope. As he and Leah stood on the rooftop, looking out over the city, the quiet hum of the world continuing on without them, Daniel felt the weight of the journey they had been on. The fight wasn't over. Maybe it never would be. The system they had exposed was still alive in the undercurrents of society, waiting for its chance to return. But for now, they had won a small victory. For now, the world knew the truth. And in that moment, Daniel allowed himself to believe that perhaps, for the first time in a long while, he could breathe. But as the camera panned out, showing them standing together, facing the unknown, the screen flickered for a brief moment, like a glitch in the Matrix. The faintest hum of static filled the air, and then the screen cut to black. A final message flashed across the screen in bold letters. The story isn't over. The credits rolled, but for everyone who had watched, the weight of what they had seen, the mysteries left unsolved, and the unsettling truth about what was yet to come lingered long after the video ended. Would Daniel and Leah truly be free? Could the conspiracy they had shattered ever truly be destroyed? Or was there something darker still hiding in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike again? The world may have changed, but some things are too deeply embedded to be erased.